My parents lied, stole my money to fund cruises and luxury brands, then left my 5-year-old son alone for days. So what I exposed in court destroyed them. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. The realization hit me at 3:17 in the morning when I found my son Finn crying in his bed, soaked in his own urine, calling for grandma and grandpa, who had promised to watch him while I worked a mandatory overnight project deadline. They were supposed to be responsible adults. Instead, they were somewhere in the Caribbean spending money they'd stolen from my accounts, leaving a kindergarten to fend for himself in their house with nothing but stale crackers and empty promises. My parents, Patricia and Richard Reeves, had spent 40 years crafting their reputation as the ideal Christian couple in our small Ohio town. Patricia, a retired church secretary with perfectly styled silver hair, knew every family's business and volunteered for every charity event. Richard, who'd worked 30 years at the Ford plant before retirement, served as a deacon and coached Little League until his knees gave out. They lived in the same house they'd bought in 1982, attended the same Methodist church, and maintained friendships with the same circle of families who'd watched them raise me and my younger sister. When my marriage fell apart 2 years ago, they stepped forward as the concerned grandparents ready to sacrifice their golden years to help their struggling son raise little Finn. Patricia would tear up, telling anyone who'd listen about how they'd given up our retirement dreams to make sure that precious boy has stability. Richard would add that family comes first, always, and they'd do whatever it took to help me get back on my feet. The community ate it up. Here were these devoted grandparents, putting their own comfort aside to help their divorced son navigate single parenthood. Church ladies would stop me at the grocery store to tell me how blessed I was to have such supportive parents. My boss at the construction firm, where I work as senior project manager, would comment on how lucky I was that family was handling childcare while I rebuilt my career. For 18 months, I believed the story too. My parents picked up Finn from kindergarten every day, fed him dinner, helped with his homework, and had him ready for bed when I got home from work. They never complained about the responsibility, never asked for money beyond what I offered for groceries and gas, and seemed to genuinely enjoy having their grandson around. But small details started adding up in ways that didn't make sense. Finn would mention being really hungry during his afternoons with grandparents. Despite them claiming he'd had full meals, he'd talk about watching television for hours because grandma and grandpa were busy with important phone calls in the other room. Most concerning, he'd describe being left alone in their house while they ran quick errands that stretched longer than a 5-year-old could accurately track. I started paying attention to their appearance during pickup times. New jewelry on Patricia, expensive cologne on Richard, designer shopping bags casually left in their living room. When I'd ask about their purchases, they'd mention finding great sales or using gift cards from the church raffle. The explanation seemed plausible enough, especially since I was focused on my own struggles with work stress and single parenting. The first real red flag came when Finn started having nightmares about being lost and unable to find his grandparents. He'd wake up crying, asking me to promise I wouldn't leave him alone like grandma and grandpa did. When pressed for details, he'd become vague and scared, saying you weren't supposed to tell me about boring grown-up stuff that would make me worry. That's when I realized I'd been so grateful for their help that I'd stopped paying attention to what that help actually looked like from Finn's perspective. I called a family meeting that Sunday after church. Sitting in their pristine living room surrounded by furniture I didn't remember them owning 6 months earlier. The leather sectional sofa, the matching recliners, the 65-inch television mounted on the wall, all new, all expensive, all purchased while they were supposedly sacrificing financially to help with Finn's care. Finn played quietly in the corner with an elaborate train set that must have cost $300. When I asked him where it came from, he looked nervously between his grandparents before mumbling, "Grandma and Grandpa bought it for me to be good. We need to discuss the child care arrangement." I began carefully, watching their faces for reactions. I've been hearing some things that concern me about Finn's supervision during the day. Patricia's transformation was immediate and dramatic. Her kindly grandmother expression melted away, replaced by the wounded martyr look I remembered from childhood discipline sessions. Ethan Michael Reeves, I cannot believe you would question our care for that precious boy. We have given up everything, our social life, our retirement plans, our own comfort to help you through this difficult time. I'm not questioning your commitment. I'm asking about specific supervision issues. What supervision issues? Richard interrupted, leaning forward in his new leather recliner with the kind of intimidating posture he'd used when I was 12 and had broken something valuable. That boy is fed, clothed, entertained, and loved every single day he's in our care. If you don't appreciate what we're doing for you, maybe it's time you figured out alternative arrangements. I pulled out my phone and showed them the credit card statement I'd printed that morning. Then help me understand these charges. The emergency card I gave you for Finn's needs shows $3,000 at Nordstrom, $1,500 at a jewelry store, and a $2,500 payment to Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, all in the past month. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finn looked up from his trains, sensing the tension in adult voices he'd learned to fear. Patricia recovered first, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd apparently had ready for this moment. Those purchases were investments in Finn's care, Ethan. We needed appropriate clothes for taking him to nice places, the zoo, children's museums, educational activities you're too busy to provide. The jewelry was a necessary purchase for church functions where we represent your family. And the cruise, your mother needed a rest, Richard said firmly. Caring for a 5-year-old every day at our age is exhausting. We arranged for proper care while we took a brief vacation to recharge so we could continue helping you. Who watched Finn during your cruise? Your Aunt Carol, of course. It was all arranged properly with family. I called Carol that evening from my car in their driveway, with Finn secured in his car seat, but still within earshot of their front door. Carol, I need to ask you about watching Finn during Mom and Dad's cruise last month. Oh honey, I only had him for 2 days. Your parents said they'd made other arrangements for the rest of the time. I assumed you knew about all the plans. What other arrangements? I'm not sure. They mentioned something about neighbors taking turns, but I didn't get details. Finn seemed fine when I had him though. We had a good time. 2 days out of 7, my parents had lied directly to my face about Finn's care during their cruise, and when I confronted them with Carol's information, they had more explanations ready. Carol must be confused about the timeline. Patricia said when I called them that night, she watched him for several days, and we had backup arrangements with the neighbors for shorter periods. Everything was properly supervised. Which neighbors? The Hendersons, the Morrisons, the Peterson family. Everyone in our neighborhood loves Finn, and was happy to help for a few hours here and there. But when I started making calls, the stories didn't match. Mrs. Henderson remembered watching Finn for maybe 3 or 4 hours one afternoon. Frank Morrison mentioned seeing Finn in the backyard alone, and assuming his grandparents were inside, the Petersons had been out of town that entire week. My parents had constructed an elaborate lie about Finn's care during their cruise, and when pressed for details, they'd created additional lies involving neighbors who either hadn't helped at all or had helped for much shorter periods than claimed. The family meeting had accomplished nothing except revealing that my parents were skilled liars who'd prepared responses for exactly these questions. I decided to approach this more systematically, treating it like a project management problem that required documentation and data collection. Over the next 6 weeks, I started building a case file with photographs, financial records, and detailed notes about Finn's condition and stories when I picked him up each day. The financial evidence was damning. Beyond the obvious luxury purchases, I discovered a pattern: large expenditures always followed my payments for Finn's legitimate expenses. When I'd pay his daycare bill or medical copays, my parents would immediately spend equivalent amounts on themselves. As if my responsible spending had freed up their budget for luxuries, I photographed their house during each visit, documenting new purchases and comparing them to their claimed financial sacrifices. The dining room table that had been scratched oak for 20 years was now polished mahogany. The kitchen appliances had been upgraded to stainless steel. Patricia's wardrobe had transformed from Walmart basics to department store brands. Most importantly, I started recording Finn's daily reports about his time with grandparents. His stories painted a picture of systematic neglect disguised as care. Long periods alone, while they took important phone calls in the other room. Meals consisting of crackers and juice boxes because grandma was too tired to cook, and frequent absences for grown-up meetings that left him with neighbors who thought they were helping for just a few minutes. But my careful documentation began disappearing or being explained away almost as quickly as I gathered it. The notebook I kept in my car was somehow missing pages when I checked it after a visit to their house. The photos I'd taken of their new purchases were dismissed by everyone. I showed them as normal retirement spending. My detailed financial analysis was met with new explanations. They'd been saving for years for these purchases. They'd received unexpected insurance settlements, they'd been investing wisely, and finally seeing returns. Most frustrating, my parents seemed to anticipate my documentation efforts. They'd comment on how they were glad to see me taking such detailed notes about Finn's care, and how it showed I was finally appreciating everything they were doing. They'd pose for photos with their new purchases, claiming they were excited to show off the nice things they could finally afford. The evidence I was gathering could be interpreted as proof that my parents were responsible grandparents who'd managed their finances well enough to afford nice things while caring for their grandson. Without inside knowledge of where the money was actually coming from, the documentation supported their narrative better than mine. Even more concerning, my parents had started making comments about my obsessive behavior and paranoid investigation of people who were just trying to help. They'd mentioned to neighbors and church friends how worried they were about my mental state, how the stress of divorce and single parenting seemed to be making me suspicious of everyone who cares about Finn. My evidence gathering was being reframed as proof that I was an unstable father who couldn't appreciate the sacrifices his parents were making for his child. I realized I needed independent verification of my concerns, people who had observed the situation without emotional investment and could provide objective testimony about Finn's care. The neighbors seemed like natural allies. They'd been the ones actually providing supervision when my parents were absent, and they'd expressed concerns to me about the situation. Frank Morrison was my first approach. As a retired security consultant, he understood the importance of accurate observation and had already mentioned seeing Finn alone in the backyard during times when my parents claimed to be supervising him. Frank, I need to ask you to document the instances when you've seen Finn unsupervised in my parents' yard. The situation might require legal intervention. His friendly demeanor immediately shifted to uncomfortable distance. Well, now Ethan, I don't want to get involved in family business. Maybe I misunderstood what I was seeing. You specifically told me you were concerned about him being alone for hours. Did I say hours? I don't really remember the exact time frames. Kids play outside by themselves all the time. That's normal for that age. But you mentioned it was unusual. Look. Her parents are good people. They've been nothing but kind to me and my wife for 15 years. If they say they were supervising that boy properly, I'm sure they were. Maybe I just didn't see them watching from inside the house. The transformation was complete and obviously coached. Frank had gone from concerned neighbor to defensive character witness in the span of 2 weeks. Mrs. Henderson across the street had mentioned multiple times that she'd watched Finn during my parents' quick errands that stretched much longer than expected. Mrs. Henderson, you told me my parents asked you to keep an eye on Finn while they went to the store. How long were they typically gone? Oh dear, I really don't remember saying that. Time gets away from you when you're my age. I'm sure it wasn't very long at all. But you specifically mentioned being surprised by how long their errands took. Did I? I don't recall being surprised about anything. Your parents are wonderful people, Ethan. That little boy is so lucky to have such devoted grandparents. I hope you appreciate what they're doing for you. The script was identical across every neighbor. People who'd expressed genuine concern about Finn's supervision had suddenly developed collective amnesia about their previous statements while enthusiastically praising my parents' dedication. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. My parents had clearly spoken to each potential witness, probably presenting themselves as worried grandparents concerned about their son's mental health and suspicious behavior toward family members who were sacrificing everything to help him. In a community where my parents had 40 years of established relationships and reputation, Their word carried infinitely more weight than mine. I was the divorced son, who had failed at marriage, and was now causing problems for the family members trying to help him get back on his feet. The witness network I'd counted on hadn't just refused to help, they'd been turned into advocates for my parents' version of events. Any legal proceeding would now feature a parade of neighbors, testifying about what devoted grandparents Patricia and Richard were, and how concerned they were about my paranoid accusations against people who were clearly doing their best in a difficult situation. With my evidence dismissed and witnesses turned against me, I made the decision to contact Child Protective Services. As someone who'd been through mandatory reporter training in my construction management role, I understood that KSBS was designed to investigate child welfare concerns objectively. Without the social dynamics that had compromised my other efforts, I called the hotline on a Tuesday morning, reporting suspected neglect and financial abuse involving my 5-year-old son's care by his grandparents. The intake worker scheduled an unannounced home visit for Thursday afternoon. My parents called me immediately after the KSBS worker left, their voices shaking with what sounded like genuine trauma but felt like calculated performance. "Ethan, how could you do this to us?" Patricia sobbed into the phone, having Child Protective Services show up at our door like we're criminals. Mrs. Pearson saw the car in our driveway. By evening, the whole neighborhood will know KSBS investigated us. Our reputation is destroyed. "I'm concerned about Finn's safety, and your son is perfectly safe," Richard shouted in the background. "We showed that woman everything, Finn's room. His toys, his snacks, his schedule, everything was perfect because we take perfect care of him. This investigation is harassment, pure and simple." When Diane Fuller, the KSBS investigator, called me the following day, her tone was professional but noticeably cool. "Mr. Reeves, I've completed my preliminary investigation regarding your son's care at his grandparents' residence. Finn appears well cared for, happy, and shows no signs of neglect or distress. The home environment is clean, appropriately stocked with child-safe foods and age-appropriate toys. And your parents demonstrated clear knowledge of your son's routine and needs. What about the financial issues? The evidence that they're using money meant for his care on luxury purchases. Child care financial arrangements are a civil matter, unless there's evidence of direct harm to the child. Your parents explained that they use their own resources for Finn's care, and occasionally purchase items for themselves with their own money. I saw no indication that your son lacks for anything he needs, and the supervision concerns the times he's been left alone. Your parents provided a detailed schedule of Finn's daily activities and the names of backup caregivers they use when necessary. I spoke with several neighbors who confirmed they've helped with childcare and described your parents as responsible and caring. Finn himself was happy, talkative, and showed no signs of fear or distress, so they can continue the current arrangement. Mr. Reeves, I understand that divorce and custody transitions create stress for all family members. Many parents struggle with adjusting to new family dynamics and may become overly concerned about childcare arrangements. I'd recommend family counseling to improve communication between you and your parents about Finn's care. The KSBS investigation hadn't just failed to find problems, it had officially validated my parents as exemplary caregivers, while identifying me as a paranoid ex-husband making false accusations against helpful family members. The report would be on file permanently, available to any future custody evaluations or legal proceedings. In the eyes of the state, my parents were now officially confirmed as appropriate caregivers, and I was officially documented as someone who makes unfounded accusations against them. Any future attempts to question their care would be viewed through the lens of this official determination that my concerns were baseless and potentially motivated by mental health issues related to divorce stress. The KSBS failure forced me to confront an uncomfortable reality. My parents weren't just careless grandparents making poor decisions. They were sophisticated manipulators who'd spent decades perfecting their public image while hiding their true priorities. If I was going to protect Finn, I needed to match their level of strategic thinking. I hired Sarah Donnelly, a family attorney who specialized in grandparent rights and custody disputes. Her initial consultation was sobering but educational. "Ethan, your parents have played this brilliantly from a legal standpoint. They have community support, an official KSBS clearance, and you've now established a documented pattern of what appears to be harassment. If this went to court tomorrow, they'd look like devoted grandparents being persecuted by an unstable son. So I should just accept that they're stealing my money and neglecting my child?" I didn't say that. I said they've positioned themselves well defensively. But people who are this calculated in their manipulation usually get overconfident and make mistakes. If you want to change this dynamic, you need to document them making those mistakes in ways that can't be explained away. That conversation completely changed my approach. Instead of trying to convince people my parents were problematic, I needed to catch them being problematic in ways that were undeniable. The first step was comprehensive financial tracking. I requested detailed statements for every account and credit card they had access to. Going back 2 years, the spending patterns were revealing luxury purchases consistently followed my payments for major Finn-related expenses, as if they were treating my responsible spending as permission for their frivolous spending. But the real breakthrough came when I decided to install a discrete security system in my own home. My parents had keys to my house for emergencies, and I'd noticed small signs that they'd been there during work hours: moved items, different thermostat settings, food missing from the refrigerator. The security cameras I installed revealed they'd been using my house as a staging area, bringing Finn there after their unsupervised outings to make it look like he'd been properly cared for all day. More damaging, the cameras captured them coaching Finn on what to tell me about his day, bribing him with candy and small toys to not worry Daddy with boring grown-up stuff that might make him sad. Most shocking, they were going through my mail, photographing financial documents, and accessing my home computer to check bank balances before planning their next expensive purchases. They were literally stealing my financial information to budget their theft of my money. But the evidence that changed everything came when my parents announced their next vacation, a 10-day Mediterranean cruise that cost $12,000. They assured me it was already paid for with money we've been saving for years, and that Finn would stay with my Aunt Carol for the entire duration. Instead of confronting their lies immediately, I decided to let them proceed while secretly documenting what actually happened. I coordinated with Frank Morrison, who had been turned against me as a witness, but still maintained basic neighborhood watch instincts. I asked him to simply note when my parents' car was present at their house during their supposed vacation, framing it as security concerns rather than child care investigation. I also arranged with Carol to provide me daily updates about Finn's actual presence at her house, explaining that I wanted detailed information about his adjustment to the temporary arrangement. What I discovered was a systematic abandonment scheme that went far beyond anything I'd suspected. Carol watched Finn for exactly 2 days out of 10, for the remaining 8 days. My parents had created an elaborate shell game involving different neighbors, each thinking they were helping for just a few hours, while others covered the remaining time. No single person realized they were part of a conspiracy that left my 5-year-old son essentially parentless for over a week. The horror unfolded day by day through my documentation. Day 1 Finn with Carol legitimate care. Day 2 Finn with Carol legitimate care. Day 3 Mrs. Henderson from 9 am to 2 p.m., then the Petersons until 6 p.m., then back to empty grandparents' house overnight. Day 4 Frank Morrison's wife from 10 am to 3 p.m., then Finn alone at grandparents' house from 3 p.m. onward. Day 5 Aber attempts to coordinate care. Finn ends up spending most of day alone. Day 6 complete breakdown of the system. The breaking point came at 2:17 in the morning on day 6, when my phone rang with Finn calling from my parents' empty house. Daddy, I'm scared, and I don't know where Grandma and Grandpa are. Mrs. Peterson was supposed to come check on me, but she didn't come, and I can't find anyone, and I don't know what to do. I raced to their house to find Finn had wet himself, too afraid to leave the house to find a bathroom at a neighbor's place. He'd been surviving on whatever snacks he could reach in the pantry, drinking water from the bathroom faucet, and sleeping on the couch because the bedroom felt too scary when nobody else is home. The neighbor who was supposed to provide overnight supervision had completely forgotten, assuming someone else was handling the arrangement. As I held my terrified, hungry, soiled child in that empty house while his grandparents shopped for jewelry in Mediterranean port cities, I finally understood that my parents weren't just selfish or irresponsible. They were dangerous. They had systematically prioritized their luxury lifestyle over my child's basic safety, creating increasingly elaborate deception schemes to hide their neglect while continuing to steal money to fund their habits. But I also realized they'd finally made a mistake too big to cover up or explain away. Instead of immediately confronting my parents or calling authorities, I spent the next 3 months methodically documenting everything while they believed they'd successfully executed their perfect deception. I had Frank Morrison provide a written statement about the actual timeline of my parents' car presence during their cruise, along with security camera footage from his property, showing their empty driveway for 8 consecutive days. I obtained affidavits from every neighbor who'd actually provided care for Finn, documenting what they'd been told about time commitments versus the reality of the coverage gaps. Most crucially, I had recorded phone calls of Finn's terrified middle-of-the-night distress, with timestamps proving exactly when my parents were unreachable during their cruise. Sarah Donnelly helped me understand that we weren't just building a case about poor babysitting decisions. The evidence showed a pattern of systematic financial theft, combined with child endangerment, aggravated by elaborate planning and deception, designed to conceal both crimes. This isn't grandparents who made some questionable child care choices, Sarah explained as we organized the evidence. This is organized elder financial abuse combined with willful child endangerment, with consciousness of guilt demonstrated by the elaborate cover-up schemes. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source: my parents' own social media accounts. During their Mediterranean cruise, they'd posted constantly about their well-deserved retirement adventures and their sacrifices finally paying off. They'd shared photos of expensive restaurants, luxury shopping expeditions, and high-end jewelry purchases, with captions like "finally treating ourselves after years of putting family first," and "grandparents deserve nice things too." The timestamps on their posts corresponded exactly to the periods when Finn was alone and calling me terrified from their empty house. We could prove they were buying $1,000 earrings in Italian boutiques, while my 5-year-old son was hungry, scared, and abandoned thousands of miles away. Their own documentation of their priorities had become evidence of their crimes. Additionally, I'd discovered their systematic theft was far more extensive than I'd initially realized. By tracing 2 years of financial records, we found they'd stolen over $32,000 from accounts meant to secure Finn's future, spending it on vacations, luxury goods, gambling, and investments in get-rich-quick schemes. They'd even taken out credit cards in my name without authorization, running up additional debt for their lifestyle, while claiming they were sacrificing financially to help with childcare. I waited until my parents returned from their cruise, tanned and relaxed, carrying shopping bags full of European luxuries purchased with money stolen from my accounts. They walked into my house expecting praise for their successful childcare arrangements, only to find Sarah Donnelly waiting with a stack of legal documents and 2 police officers. Patricia and Richard Reeves, Officer Martinez began formally, "You're under arrest for financial elder abuse, child endangerment, identity theft, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The transformation was immediate and telling. Patricia's grandmotherly mask vanished, replaced by cold calculation, as she immediately began constructing her defense. "This is ridiculous. We've sacrificed everything for that ungrateful boy and his child. We demand to speak to our attorney." Richard tried intimidation one final time. "You're destroying your own family, Ethan. When this backfires, you'll have no one left who cares about you or that boy. I'm protecting my son from people who abandoned him to buy jewelry." I replied, playing the audio recording of Finn's terrified phone call for the officers. The silence that followed was the first time in my adult life I'd seen my parents without a ready manipulation or excuse. The court case was swift and comprehensive, with recorded evidence, financial documentation, witness statements, social media posts, and their own documented admissions. Their defense strategy collapsed entirely. The judge was particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that my parents had systematically exploited both their son's trust and their grandson's vulnerability to fund a luxury lifestyle, while creating dangerous and traumatic situations for a minor child. Patricia received 2 years in minimum security prison for financial elder abuse and child endangerment. Richard received 2.5 years for being the primary orchestrator of the financial crimes and identity theft. Both were ordered to pay full restitution of $32,000 plus legal fees and damages, totaling $47,000. Most importantly, the court issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting any unsupervised contact with Finn until he reaches 18, with supervised therapeutic visits possible only if Finn chooses to pursue that relationship, and mental health professionals determine it's in his best interest. The community response was initially mixed, but evolved as people understood the full scope of the evidence. Some church members initially criticized me for sending elderly parents to prison over family disagreements, but most recognized that systematic financial theft, combined with child abandonment, represented far more serious crimes than simple family conflict. Frank Morrison became one of my most vocal supporters, often saying, "When you see 8 days of surveillance footage showing an empty house while a 5-year-old was supposedly being cared for, you realize this wasn't poor judgment, this was criminal negligence." The Methodist Church, where my parents had maintained their reputation for 40 years, initially struggled with the revelations, but ultimately supported the protection of children over the reputation of longtime members. Several other families came forward after the conviction, admitting they'd had concerns about my parents' child care claims, but hadn't wanted to interfere in family business. One couple revealed they'd suspected financial irregularities when my parents had suddenly afforded luxury purchases that seemed inconsistent with retirement incomes. Finn is now 8 and thriving in a stable environment, with reliable, professional childcare, and a father who prioritizes his safety over family appearances. He occasionally asks about his grandparents, but without the confusion and fear that once characterized those conversations. Through therapy, he's learned to articulate his experiences and understand that the abandonment wasn't his fault. I've rebuilt my financial security, paid off the debts my parents created, and established college savings accounts that only I can access. The house feels peaceful in ways it never did when I was constantly worried about hidden manipulation and theft. My parents were released after serving their full sentences, as they showed no remorse and participated minimally in rehabilitation programs. They've attempted to contact me through letters and intermediaries, always positioning themselves as victims of a vindictive son who chose strangers over family loyalty. Their letters follow predictable patterns: claims they were just trying to help, accusations that I've destroyed the family over minor misunderstandings, and demands that I show Christian forgiveness by allowing them access to Finn. I've learned something fundamental from this experience: real love involves sacrifice and responsibility, not performance and manipulation. What my parents offered was never devotion, it was exploitation disguised as care, theft disguised as sacrifice, and abandonment disguised as family loyalty. The money has been repaid, the legal matters permanently resolved, and Finn's safety absolutely secured. My parents are free to rebuild their lives, but they'll do it without access to the child they endangered and the son they betray. Sometimes protecting the people you love means accepting that family loyalty has limits. And those limits should always stop at the point where love becomes exploitation, where care becomes control, and where family becomes a weapon used against the vulnerable. Finn is safe now, thriving in an environment where adults prioritize his well-being over their own comfort, where promises are kept and trust is earned through consistent action rather than demanded through blood relation. That's the only outcome that ever really mattered. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.